Good morning. It's May 23rd, May 24th, I think. So this morning I was gonna get into guilt. No, I was gonna get into grief, which is 75 hertz of consciousness level. And I wanted to start by just saying that so I'm focusing on, this is a choice of mine on my channel, to focus on the states of consciousness and the levels of consciousness. And as you might know, I'm starting at the levels of consciousness based on Stephen Hawkins, or David Hawkins' book, his research, starting at the very bottom of shame and going up to enlightenment. And I'm if I didn't understand and know that this is the solution, transcending your consciousness, attaining enlightenment ultimately is the solution in today's world, and the transition that this world is going through right now. There's lots of different people on YouTube and social media that are proposing different reactions to what's happening right now, and the changes that are happening with AI, with data centers, with the Iran war, with prices going up, all this stuff. There's and what I want to accomplish on the dial is, and I'm no expert in this, obviously, but I'm learning myself, that raising the collective's consciousness is the solution to what's going on. We have to raise our consciousness levels before we start taking physical action to, like, maybe some people are trying to stop what's going on, or like all this stuff. But yeah, in my opinion, this is the solution. And this is even what the Transcendentalists tried to do in the 1800s as a reaction to the industrialization that was happening. In what I read yesterday, just, when the Transcendentalists were coming out, like, rich people, the billionaires, were buying up farms and land, and the whole idea of America as being like independent farmers, I mean, it's an illusion. Where industrialization ultimately took over, and the country, America, catapulted into the Civil War, which, to me, call me a crazy conspiracy theorist, but I'm tending to think that the Civil War was not organic, that it was actually planned, and the billionaires actually coordinated that to happen so that industrialization could ultimately take over in America, which led to the world wars and all this. Anyways, so grief, the level of grief, and okay, let me say this too. Each of these levels of consciousness, I'm briefly touching on, and these levels are so deep that I am going to go, after I'm done getting to enlightenment, or maybe even before, I'm going to have to reread this stuff and go even deeper into each level, because this is really deep stuff, and I'm learning a lot about ego, how the ego plays a part, and the idea of ego goes far deeper than just the surface level ego stuff like pride, arrogance. It's part of your personality. And this is stuff I'm learning in my life. This is pretty much my introduction to psychology, and Freudian concepts. But yeah. So I plan to go deeper into these things, because this is, again, I believe this is the solution. The solution to the world's problems is us as humanity raising our levels of consciousness and becoming more enlightened. That's more than anything else. So, grief. This is the level of sadness, loss, and despondency. Most people have experienced it for periods of time, but those who remain at this level live a life of constant regret and depression. This is the level of mourning, bereavement, and remorse about the past. It is also the level of habitual losers and those chronic gamblers who accept failure as part of their lifestyle, often resulting in the loss of jobs, friends, family, and opportunity, as well as money and health. Major losses in early life make one later vulnerable to passive acceptance of grief, as though sorrow were the price of life. In grief, one sees sadness everywhere. The sadness of little children, of world conditions, and even the sadness of life itself. This level colors one's entire vision of existence. Part of the syndrome of loss is the sense of inability to replace what is lost or what is symbolized. And I'm going to get more into this. Grief is all about it's all about letting go. The solution to grief is all about letting go of attachments. And at this point in our history, the level of grief is a big one, because this stage in humanity that we're at is going to require all of us to let go of our attachments. The whole boomer generation, 1947 on, was all about people attaching themselves to beliefs, to physical possessions, houses, cars. That's That was the American dream. It was all about attachments. It was all about buying stuff. It was all about corporations and these mega corporations getting you to buy their stuff. So now we're at a point in our history where I believe divinity is calling us to a higher enlightenment, to a higher consciousness, which requires grief, which requires it requires grief. It requires us letting go of our attachments, the things that we think make us who we are. That's what the boomer generation was all about. Like, your house is who you are, your car is who you are, your physical possessions, your beliefs are who you are. And you look into the mirror, and even your body isn't who you are. Your body is being used by your spirit. Anyways, so that's the source of grief. And happiness, true happiness doesn't, as this goes into, true happiness doesn't come from external objects or being attached to belief systems, or being attached to being a Democrat or a Republican or any of these groups. You have to let go of your attachments. True happiness comes from within. It doesn't come externally. It doesn't, So anyways, where was I? There is a generalization from the particular, so that the loss of a loved one is equated with the loss of love itself. At this level, such emotional losses may trigger a serious depression or even death. Though grief is the cemetery of life, it still has more energy to it than does apathy. That's why each level of consciousness that we go up there's more energy added to it. And this was even saying in the lower levels of consciousness, like shame, apathy, guilt. A person doesn't even have the energy level to take his own life, which is pretty intense. That's when you're at the lower levels, a person doesn't even have the ability to take his own life, that's pretty intense. I don't like talking about things like this, but that's where a lot of people are at in life, especially at this time in our history. So, thus, when traumatized, apathetic patients begin to cry, we know they are getting better, for once they start to cry, they will eat again. So that was the introduction to grief. And I'll just read this part. The universality of the experience is due to the structure and nature of the ego, which misperceives the source of happiness as external or emotional, and imbues it with specialness. In reality, the only source of happiness is from within, and its mechanism is intrapsychic and internal. Society collectively assumes that certain conditions, objects, or qualities are valuable. And this agreement affects personal choice. The spiritually evolved person who has few wants or attachments is relatively immune to grief, as the experience of the source of happiness originates from within and not dependent on externals. If the source of happiness is acquired through ego mechanisms, it is based on imagery, belief systems, and projected values rather than on absolute reality itself, which is invulnerable to loss. Objects, qualities, or relationships become overvalued by virtue of the mechanism of attachments and the ensuing projection of value. So yeah, I mean, again, I'll say again, I'm going to go back and revisit each level because of its vital importance. And this stuff transcends belief systems. Yeah, it's enlightening to me to find out about these levels. So yeah, I think that's all for this morning. And the next level of consciousness I'm going to get into is fear, which is another big one. I mean, the levels of shame and I keep forgetting the name of the shame and guilt and apathy. These are all very low levels that hardly have the energy. There's such low energy in these levels that that's why it says it's the closest thing to death. It's the closest thing to death without actually dying, which is actually worse than death. So, but again, death isn't the final frontier. We go on to higher consciousness after death, in my belief. So anyways, have a good day.